Welcome, everybody. We still have a couple of minutes before we get started. So as people enter, we're just going to go ahead and give them a couple of minutes and we'll start at 3 o'clock. Okay, welcome. I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm so glad that you could come join us today for our February webinar. We're going to be speaking today about getting our students NJSLA ready. And specifically, we're focused on ELA today. So I'm really excited. My name is Michele Regan. I'm the managing director here at Inspired Instruction. And hopefully, this is not your first webinar, and hopefully it won't be your last. So welcome. And we are going to be using the Q&A feature today. So along the bottom of your Zoom, there is a tab with a variety of buttons that you can use. And we've found that the chat feature doesn't always work in our webinars. So instead, we want to just invite you to use the Q&A feature. Okay, so you can go ahead and click on Q&A if you have a question, or if I ask the group a question, you can respond in that tab. Okay, so again, welcome. If you've just joined, we're going to go ahead and get started. Okay, so for today's agenda, we're going to look at what do we know from the data in terms of the standards that we should be focusing on. It's February. We have 3 solid months that we can be working on NJSLA related strategies and skills. And so we're going to start with what are the standards we should be focusing on. And then we're going to dive into some specific reading strategies and writing strategies that you can take away today and start tomorrow. Okay. When you signed up, you probably noted that you were going to be receiving some resources along with the webinar. So after today, you'll receive a follow-up with those resources. So again, you should be able to start tomorrow with some of these strategies. Okay, so let's get started with what does the data tell us? What do we know? I have been working with Inspired for 10 years. I've been working around NJSLA for almost as many. And what I will tell you is that we consistently see questions in certain areas around certain standards. So I want to bring those up to you today. And I also want to tell you how you can read your data if you have access to this evidence statement and how that can guide the areas that you focus on. So if we look at this sample evidence statement from 2021, you'll see that I have big red oblong circles here or shapes that identify what I'm going to call the bottom third of the questions. And so, especially at this time of year, we want to give kids access to questions that are going to be on the easier end and are going to be standards that are very frequently asked, okay, or assessed. So again, I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but you'll see that this is the order of the most difficult with question 1 all the way to the least difficult. And so we want to give kids access and practice with those questions that might be the easiest for them to gain points. I hit that too quickly. I did just also want to share with you, if you notice my circle to the right, I'm looking at the writing tasks, okay? So all the way on this column right here that says PCR task, these are the 3 writing tasks that students are asked to do. And if you notice, there's always a gap. Students tend to have difficulty with these writing items. They are challenging. They're often presented different than writing tasks in our curriculum. And so we want to make sure that we're placing heavy focus on those steps toward mastery or toward success on those writing tasks. So I will be sharing some strategies around the LAT and RST on-demand writing prompts, okay? And let's keep moving along, and I'm going to show you the accompanying sheet that comes along with this evidence statement graph. This usually comes as the second page, and you'll see here, this is a listing of all of the items, the type of item, what standard was assessed, the order of most difficult to least difficult, and an important piece to note, how many students received this item. Okay, so what are the things, if you were to see this document, what would you focus on? And what I usually tell my schools that I partner with is first look at the questions that most students got asked. So anything with that there's a 0, we're not going to do a deep dive because our students didn't receive that. Okay. So if you were looking at your own data, you would want to look for those with the highest student count. So anything in this particular school's case that has a 51 means all students received this question. All students in this fifth grade, this number of fifth grade classes, okay? But what can this tell me about testing across schools and across districts, across the state? And what you can see is that if we look at that bottom third, right, my little zoom bar is covering, so let me move that. In our bottom third, which goes up to question 24, which is a little bit covered here, you'll see that there's a repetition of some of these items, okay? So if we start from the bottom, we see RI 5.2. That second standard is that standard around theme and central idea, okay? So in that bottom third, we have a theme or central idea question asked twice. Okay. We also have 1, 2, 3 vocabulary questions. So RI 5.4, RL 5.4, and then the L, which stands for language, 5.4. So we're seeing in the bottom third, there's always going to be some vocabulary questions. And then we will also see, generally speaking, standard 1 and standard 3. Okay, so while that seems like a lot of info, let's move on to my next slide because you're going to see it presented there. Oh, I'm sorry. Before we get to that, there's just one more thing about the data that I wanted to share, and then we can dive into the specific standards. This is an important takeaway, whether you ever see your specific school or not. If you have the privilege of being able to see your school's content standards roster, which is what this particular document is called, you will be able to see each individual student's performance in each of the categories against New Jersey and against, and against the state. So New Jersey is the NJ, ST is the student, okay? Why do I point this out to you? Why did I want to show this to you? If you take a look at the literary analysis column and the research simulation column, you will see that just in this small number of students, there are quite a few zeros. So let's look at the research simulation. There are 11 zeros out of this small number of students. There are actually only 1, 2, 3 students, and this is actually a 100, 4 students who received a score. Why is that important? Because I can tell you how much that deflates the school's overall performance. It certainly deflates the student's individual performance. And more often than not, the reason they're getting those zeros is because they're not completing the task at all. Okay. And so what that tells us is that we need to really be thinking about giving our students lots of exposure to the writing tasks, as well as scaffolding those writing tasks so that they will at least approach the task. Okay. So let's dive in a little bit more. All right. So here are all the things that you want to consider. Like I mentioned, ELA scores in general are deflated by students who are not attempting the task at all. And often that's happening because kids can't overcome that initial hurdle of knowing how to start, where to start. Okay. So what do we want to do about this? We want to make sure that we're modeling tasks, that we're scaffolding and providing lots and lots of practice. And even now, in end of February, there is still time to do this. And the way that I want you to think about this and the specific strategies I'm going to share are really related to this last bullet, that the practice can be focused less on writing the entire essay and more about understanding and being able to complete the individual steps. So I'm going to dive into that. And if you leave with nothing else today, I think just that visual of seeing how many kids don't attempt the task, if you leave with some strategies to help them start the task, it's going to definitely inflate your scores overall. It's going to increase student scores. It's going to increase scores overall in your school. Okay, so before you saw me share with you the data and the list that had the specific standards, and you saw me circle the bottom third, what do we know about standards repetition in the testing over time? So these standards show up every year. And not only do they show up every year, but they show up multiple times. Okay. So key ideas and details, standard 1, 2, and 3 show up for reading literature and reading informational text. Okay. Standard 1 is the text evidence standard. So when we talk about the item types, I think it's going to become very clear how frequently standard 1 is assessed, because kids are asked to provide evidence for all of the part A, part B questions, right? That's what part B is. And then they're also asked to provide evidence in their writing. So standard 1 is assessed again and again. Standard 2 and standard 3, again, this is on the low end. So these are questions about theme and central idea. These are questions about characters and setting and their relationships. Okay. And then we have our vocab standards. So RL and RI 4, as you saw before on my chart. And then language 4 and 5 both have to do with vocabulary. And then finally, our writing standards. And if you've been teaching ELA for any time, you know that standards 1 through 3 are the 3 genres. So the informational text genre, the writing information genre, the narrative genre, and excuse me, the opinion or persuasive genre. Okay. So the important thing to remember about the writing, besides just having kids be familiar with the different genres of writing, is that when they get to the writing tasks, they will be getting points for both their ability to express themselves and demonstrate comprehension, and also these reading standards. So what does that mean? Basically, if you have a prompt that's asking students to talk about a character or compare and contrast themes, right? The student is getting points for both their ability to master that particular standard in reading, as well as their ability to then put that in writing. So those writing tasks are really critical. I'm going to pause for a moment and ask you to use your Q&A if anybody wants me to pause and if you have questions that I can answer at this time. So if you came in late, the Q&A little icon is right next to chat, and on the other side is the share screen, and you can click on that to ask a question. Okay, I'm going to pause for a moment. Okay, well, please don't hesitate to use the Q&A if you have questions throughout. I'm also going to try to leave some time at the end that I can answer questions, because this is a lot of information. It's very meaty, but I think just some of these basic ideas can really help with setting students up for success. Okay. All right, so we're going to go into the reading questions. And I want to share with you several examples across different grade levels. And I'm going to ask you what do you notice and wonder? And this is something that you can jot down on your side or use the Q&A to share whatever you notice and wonder about these particular questions. Okay. When you're doing that, what I'm going to ask you to think about is looking at the question, how is it presented? What do students need to do to be able to be successful? And I'm not just talking about get the right answer. I'm talking about what do they need to do first in terms of the directions and things like that. And then finally, how do these questions compare to what kids are seeing in the curriculum? So before I have us do that, I'm going to open the Q&A. And so the questions are about the recording. The recording will be posted on our site after today. And a copy of the slides, we take automatic attendance, so you don't have to worry about an attendance sheet. And then we don't share the slides, but you will receive a resource document afterwards that when you see the strategies that I'm sharing today, there will be links in there that you can then go ahead and access those and try them with your students, or if you're an administrator, share them with your teachers. Okay. Great. Thank you so much for asking those questions because I'm sure other people also wanted to know. Okay, so as I show these examples in the next 3 or 4 slides, think about these 3 things. Okay, and again, you can put your answers in the Q&A, or you can just jot them down as things to keep in mind. Okay, this is a grade 3 sample. Take a moment. What do you notice and wonder about this particular question? And like I said, feel free to stick that in the Q&A. I'm going to be watching to see if anyone sticks anything in, but in the meantime, I'm going to share the first things that jump out at me. Okay, this, a couple of things. First off, if you notice in part A, it's mentioning a video. Okay, so we want to be asking ourselves, am I using video in the classroom to supplement any of my texts, literary or informational? And related to that, am I asking students questions related to that video? I'm going to pop into the Q&A. Okay, so Allison shared she sees the word images. So again, a couple of things come to mind. So are we practicing questions? Are we asking questions with students around images, whether those be in a video or just images in a picture book, in an article, a diagram? These are all great opportunities to practice these kinds of questions with, because they are absolutely up for grabs in terms of being on the NJSLA. Okay, another thing that comes to mind for me is in part B, this is asking the students to choose 2 correct answers or 2 of the best answers. Okay, and that's important because especially young children, and this is grade 3, keep in mind, they want to have 1 right answer. So building that habit of text evidence and that there are multiple good pieces of evidence is an important strategy that you can start tomorrow. So if you're doing any work around evidence with your 3rd graders, and certainly on up, you're going to want to start asking them to share the 2 best pieces or the 3 best pieces, but we want to wean them off the 1 right answer. Okay. Okay, so we got another question. Okay, and Josephine shared 2. That's what I shared. Okay, these are really important pieces. Now, the other piece is notice that your choices here have the timestamp of the video. Is that super, super important? I think with anything that looks out of the ordinary to you, you're going to want to show some samples to students and just talk about it. Whenever I want to share a question to get kids familiar, I'm not even worried about the right answer. What I want kids to do is tell me, what do you need to do in this question? And hopefully they're going to say to you, we need to give 2 answers. And then, or you could say to them, what do you notice about this question? And they might say, it has numbers next to. What do those numbers mean? Okay. And so you want to be able to share with them that in the videos on this platform, there will be little timestamps that if they need to go back, they can do that. Honestly, many kids are going to just go ahead and ignore the timestamps. And what I usually recommend around videos is have the students always watch it twice. I say to them, watch the video once, then read the question and watch the video again. Most videos are going to be 3 minutes or less, so it's not a big time suck, and it's worth it so that they have kind of the context before they have to answer a question. Okay, let's move on to our next sample. And again, feel free to put any questions in the Q&A. Okay, so take a moment. What do you notice and wonder? What jumps out to me immediately is the fact that it references a specific paragraph. A great strategy that, again, you can start right away if you haven't been doing this, is when students have a photocopy of an article or of a literary piece, ask them to number the paragraphs. It's a great habit for yourself to practice finding text evidence, because you can help them narrow it down instead of having them find text evidence from the entire article. In your practice with them, you can say, oh, I want you to look in paragraph 5 for the evidence, or a couple of paragraphs. But that's a really good habit to get into, is have them number the paragraphs down the side, and you will definitely want to model this first. The other thing I notice is that this is a phrase and not just a word. Okay. And they may or may not be exposed to having to find vocabulary in context that, is a phrase. Okay. So just something to maybe show them. And then in part 2, again, keeping in mind, we don't want them to get confused about the paragraph 19. Okay. That's where the phrase was used, but they're asking them which sentence from the article helps the reader understand the word, the meaning of the phrase as it's used. But this is important that they understand that this evidence comes from different paragraphs throughout the article. Okay, just something, again, you want to get them familiar with so they don't get confused. Okay, any thoughts or questions about what we're seeing so far? Okay, we're going to move on to 7th grade. I tried to do every other so we'd get a good sampling. Okay, what do you notice and wonder about this particular type of question? Okay, what immediately jumps out to me is that when we talked about that third thing I wanted you to think about, right? So how is it presented? What do kids have to do? And how is it different than what they see in their curriculum? Okay. What immediately jumped out to me about this is we ask about theme all the time, but are we making the connection between the theme and other literary elements? So for example, in this case, how do the dragon's actions contribute to the development of the theme? So a question assessing standard 2, which is the theme or central idea standard, we want to look at that in its entirety and think about what are the different ways this could be assessed. And if you're looking at your curriculum and thinking, it doesn't ask things like this, it just asks straight out, what is the theme? Then you're going to want to pull some questions from the released items, or you're going to want to make your own that mimic this. Okay, so showing that connection. Also, part B, it's again 2 answers, but interestingly, instead of showing them actual evidence, they're saying which 2 paragraphs from it support the answer. So now, what do kids need to do? They need to go back to each of these paragraphs, skim the paragraphs and say, oh, yes, this does show the dragon's actions. Okay. So again, this is a multi-step kind of question. You're going to want to think about ways that you might mimic something like this. And finally, I have a grade 9, obviously significantly more rigorous. Again, 2 right answers. But what jumped out to me here is it's asking for 2 central ideas. So you're going to want to think about, as kids get into the upper grades, it's not always one idea that's important. And so we want to have discussions about multiple, especially a multi-paragraph. This could be literary, this could be informational. What are 2 central ideas or even 2 themes? Okay. They kind of did a little tricky thing here with part B because they're only asking for evidence that supports central idea 1. Okay, so what does this tell me? This tells me that, again, when I mentioned to you before that you're going to want to practice items with students, much less interested in the right answer and more interested in, hey, what is this asking me to do? Helping kids understand the importance of following the directions so that they can be successful. Okay. All right, we went over some of the reading tasks, and I'm going to show you some strategies that are high engagement and low stakes. So while practicing for NJSLA, we again want to build kids' confidence and their competence in asking these questions, but we want to do it in an engaging way so it doesn't feel like test prep. Okay, so let's go through some of these strategies, and then we'll talk about ways that you can embed this into what you're already doing. So you heard me mention released items. So the New Jersey Digital Item Library, this link is in the resource I'm going to share after, is a place that you can pull items that have been asked before. You can search by standard. And so if you're going to do that, I highly recommend pulling the ones that are asked most frequently, standards 1 through 4, okay? Or you can use them as a model and you can create your own questions for text that you're reading. Okay, so I think about 4 ways that you could potentially use these and embed with what you're already doing. So as a do now, all of those questions you saw before can be used as a do now where you pull it up, you give kids Post-its, you say to them, what is this asking you to do? Or what's the first thing you're going to do with this question? They can turn and talk, they can pair up with a small group, and then they're going to share out. And literally, you're really just doing 2 things. You're exposing them to what the question looks like, and you're getting them to do the heavy lifting, the thinking, now in a low stakes environment. You're also not spending too much time. And why is that important? We don't want this to feel like drill and kill, and we don't want kids to tune out. So we're going to keep it super short. Okay. Another important strategy is what we call side-by-side instruction. So especially if you notice your curriculum items, the text-dependent questions, the different comprehension questions, especially if they look different, you're going to want to put both up. So, okay, here's a question from your anthology. And now here's what it might look like on NJSLA. What's the difference? Does anyone notice anything different here? Oh, well, this one is asking me to find evidence from 2 different paragraphs, and this question just says find evidence. Again, you want kids to have some exposure so that as they start thinking about things like theme or central idea or even text evidence, that they will have seen a variety of ways that it might look. Okay. The third one is through stations or centers. And to me, it doesn't matter what grade you're teaching. So, when my kids were in high school, my children, they absolutely loved doing stations or centers. It's more engaging. They usually get to work with peers. And so they are more tuned into the content. What I like about this is you can do this one of 2 ways. If you are teaching a particular standard, okay, this week or this month, we're working on central idea, then you set up stations using released items around central idea. If you want to flip that, if you're teaching a particular text or novel, then you can pull questions or model questions after that novel around multiple standards. So we're going to have 4 stations and we're going to have a vocab station, and we're going to have a theme station, and a text evidence station, and so on. Okay, because it's giving them practice with those very common standards that are often asked. Okay, and you could also create some of these and have them ready for fast finishers. Again, if you're making it into a station or a center and you have something that's in a page protector or laminated, then they can go pull those and have practice when they complete their independent work. Okay, anyone have questions or any comments before I keep moving on? If you think of something, please don't hesitate to pop it in. Okay, I'm going to give you two activities. Both of these are linked in the resource. The first one is called A Without B. Basically, what you're going to do here is give kids access to the passage and part A. Okay, so I'm going to show you. I'm going to click into, whoops. This is the part A. I linked the passage, so when you receive the resource, it's going to take you to the digital item library, and you're going to see the text passage. Okay, let me go back to the directions for a minute. Here's what you're going to do. You're going to ask kids to read the short passage and answer part A by themselves. And you can have them do that with a Post-it. If you have the passage pulled up on your whiteboard, give them a Post-it. If you have it printed out, give them a highlighter. Now what you want them to do is find their own text evidence. So you're not giving them part B. You're just asking them to find evidence of that answer. Okay, so if this was the answer, the question, which word best describes the narrator, and they chose greedy, they would have to find evidence of this character, I'm sorry, narrator being greedy, and they would go ahead and find it. What do we want them to do next? We then want them to get together with a group or with a pair and share their answers. Let's say you're doing this with a group of 4 students, and let's say they have different evidence. This is an awesome opportunity for them to work on the concept of the best piece of evidence. Okay, so they have 4 people, maybe 2 have the same sentence highlighted, and 2 other students have 2 different pieces. They talk amongst themselves and decide this is the best piece. We have decided, we've come to consensus, we like this one the best. Okay, at that time, I always like them to use the signal phrases like the text says, the author states, in paragraph blank, okay? Because all of those practice verbally with those phrases will help them translate that into when they're writing on the writing prompts. Okay, so again, this can be done really quick. It can be done at the start of the lesson. It could be done as an exit ticket. Okay, so super simple, A without B. The next one I like to do is called not. And basically what you're going to do is you're going to choose a question based on the standard you're teaching. Okay, and just keep in mind, you want to look for those questions on the digital item library that have either a very short text passage or reference a video or an image, something that, again, gives them some familiarity. And then what you want them to do is answer this individually, and they're going to choose which answer they think is not correct. Okay, so here is the question. Which cause and effect statement about the information in the article is correct? So they're going to choose one that is not the answer. But here's where they're going to get practice. We want them to tell why not. If they can tell us why not, then that translates in them being able to tell us what the correct answer is and why the evidence supports that, right? So for why not, there could be something that says there is no reference to animals eating bones in this article. Great. The practice, the skill of close reading is happening when they dive back into the text. Okay. All right. Whoop. I'm going to just go back and show you really quickly. You can do this individually where they don't have to share with a peer. You could just collect them, or you could again have them share with a peer and talk about why. Okay. Either way, it's a great activity, nice and quick. Okay. If it's a video or an image, you show that to the whole class, and then they're off and answering. Okay. All right, we're going to dive into the writing tasks for the last 10, 15 minutes here. And the writing tasks, as I said to you before, are super important. I'm just going to show you a couple samples. This is third grade. Okay, and I have all three writing types, the narrative, the LAT, and the RST. And generally speaking, I usually talk about how the LAT and the RST are very similar in what students are doing. The narrative is its own sort of different and a little bit easier, and I can explain that if anyone has questions. I see that somebody raised their hand, so hang on one second. It says Catherine raised their hand. How can I find Catherine? Oh, it came and went. Catherine, if you have a question, if you could stick it in Q&A, because I don't see the raised hand anymore. Okay, so feel free to put that in. I'll close that for a second. Okay, so if you take a look at these, we want to, again, kind of go through the same process that we did a moment ago and think about what are students asked to do in each prompt and where might they face a challenge. Okay, I think I just saw someone put in another question. The recording, Catherine, is going to be on our website after, by tomorrow. Okay, you'll receive an email with the resources, but if you want the recording, you need to go onto our website. Okay, here's another example, some grade 8. But when you're looking at these, again, keep in mind, these are wordy, and we want to really, as the teacher, walk through what is being asked so that we can help students then break down the prompts. This is that first step. When I mentioned to you earlier that students are getting zeros, more often than not, it's because there's something about the prompt that they're missing, that they're confused about, that feels like it's a really heavy lift for them. And so we want to help them be able to get over that initial hurdle of breaking down the prompt. Okay, so how do we do that? Okay, I'm just going to share with you briefly the rubrics because I want you to think about what is the end result? What should that look like? Okay, and I have a lot of activities that we can talk about, and it looks like my time is going to be wrapping up quickly. So I'm going to just touch on these. What I recommend is that you spend some time looking at the rubric. I'm not going to go into it in detail today, but this top section is where students get the most points. Up to 19 points is for 4th grade and up, because this middle section, all this reading comprehension and written expression, wherever the student mostly falls, you multiply by 3. Okay, so the majority of points is coming from the section that shows comprehension, using text evidence, providing clear reasoning, and addressing all parts of the prompt. Okay, so I just recommend that you check out the rubric. It is on the NJSLA website. And again, if you do want to download this recording, you can spend some more time on this slide. Okay, because it is something important that you know what the end outcome is, that you can then communicate that to your students. Okay, so we're going to dive into some of these high leverage strategies so that you walk away with things you can do tomorrow. And I think I see another question. Let me see. The rubric. So Christina asked, where do we find these rubrics? So I think probably the easiest way, Christina, is to just Google NJSLA rubrics for ELA. But if you do go on to the NJSLA New Meridian, and I can type that, and I think I can type that into the Q&A here, the New Meridian website. Let me see here, type answer. New Meridian is the website that is the platform. It also has all of the guides, the rubrics, all of the things that you would need. So you can check it out there. Okay. All right. So if you want to plan for these writing, it's the same process you would go through for the reading. You can either use the NJ digital item library or create questions modeled after those using your own texts. But here are 4 strategies. Okay. Pairing texts, unpacking the prompt, pre-writing, and using exemplars. So I'm going to go through all 4 of these with you. And like I said, some of these have resources that go along with it. So pairing text. If your students are not having practice comparing, contrasting, evaluating two texts on the same topic, start tomorrow. That is really an immediate recommendation that I can make. And this doesn't have to be just a written text. It could be infographics, diagrams, videos, because kids have to start to be able to do that synthesis now before the day of. Okay, you want to ask questions that help them make connections, compare and contrast, evaluate things like point of view as they start to get through the middle and upper grades. Okay, and you want to have them talk and write about those texts. But notice here I say it does not have to be the full essay, because what we're really wanting them to do is do the heavy lifting of synthesis before, so they have an understanding of how to do it. And then the day of, it's going to come much more easily to them. Okay. And then I always say to do this, let's start with images. Here is my favorite activity. It's called Conversations. You're going to be getting a link to this. Okay. You set up stations around the room using all images. Eventually you will read a related text, but you're going to start with images, charts, maps, photographs. Students are going to go from section to station to station. They're going to have a question and answer sheet, a little foursquare, and they're going to fill in their responses. Then they are going to go to a small group discussion. And then you will do a whole group synthesis activity. Okay. This is a great way for them to make connections between the images, between the maps, before they ever read the article. Then once you have them read the article or read a story, then they can think about, oh, well, I remember when I was doing that station activity that I saw a boycott. And in this article, it talks about a boycott. Okay, so it's a great way to practice synthesis, low stakes. Okay. Breaking down the prompt. You heard me say this before. These are the 3 things you ask them to do, and you're going to model it first when you break down a prompt. How many and what text must you include in your response? What does the prompt assert? You'll see what that means in a moment. And what do I have to do? Okay, here's an example. You give them 3 different colors of highlighters. You're going to model it for them. Okay, so in red was what texts. In yellow is what does this prompt assert about these texts? Well, it's telling me that there are going to be similarities and differences in how the authors develop themes. Okay, so I know before I ever read that I'm looking for theme, and they're telling me there's probably going to be some similarities and differences. Okay, what do I need to write about? That's in blue. I have to have a theme for each, and I have to analyze how it is developed. Okay, and this is a great way to get kids over that hurdle of where do I start? Okay, because immediately they can take this and do a restatement and start out with what the prompt asserts. In the Count of Monte Cristo and Blessings, there are similarities and differences in how the authors develop the theme. They've already gotten points. Okay, and now what they have to do is move on to the next pieces. Okay, so this I can't tell you is just super important. In the resource that you're getting, you're going to have an activity that comes with multiple prompts that you can use with your students. All right, what do I mean by pre-write? In the time we have remaining, one of the important things is that kids want to write as they go. Okay, and what I usually recommend is have them use a graphic organizer as they're reading the articles. Okay, I just read that prompt. I now know I am looking for theme and I'm looking for how it's developed. So now that I have this, when I read the Blessings, when I read the Count of Monte Cristo, I can start jotting down evidence. Okay, you want to absolutely model this. You can pre-create this graphic organizer, but before the day of, you're going to want to practice, how do I make one using a blank sheet of paper? Okay, because the day of, they should have a blank sheet of paper. So you are going to, I usually call it a T-chart. Okay, you're going to have them make a T-chart. I'm going to take my blank piece of paper and I'm going to fold it in half. And that's text 1 and text 2. Okay. If they're doing an RST and grade 4 and up, you have 3 pieces to read: texts, images, diagrams. I call it a 3 chart. So I taught you how to make a T chart, folding it in half. Let's make a 3 chart, and I fold it twice. Okay. So you have a couple of different options, but the point is to get kids to set the purpose for reading, look at what the prompt is, and start gathering evidence as they go. Okay. I know our time is winding down. This is my last strategy for you. Before I showed you the rubrics, okay, on the New Meridian, oh, good, I have it here for you. On the New Meridian released samples site, you can find the sample prompts and text, as well as student sample responses. Okay, so what you're going to want to do is look for those sample responses, and most of them have annotations, which means they have the score and they have the specific feedback that the NJSLA scorers gave to this item. The whole point here is let the students look at these, okay? I usually don't give students the 4s, the top. I usually give them the 3s because we want it to be achievable. But then we want them to see that, okay, what are all the things? Remember that rubric I showed you before? I make that into a student-friendly checklist. And I ask the kids to look at it. Well, did it respond? Did this student respond to all parts of the prompt? Okay, that's easy enough to check. Yes, we broke down the prompt and now we see they talked about both texts, right? Which is my next question here. Did they talk about all the text they needed to talk about? Did they provide references and evidence to the text? Okay. Did they have a restatement of the prompt or the thesis? So giving them a student-friendly checklist like this is based on the rubric, but you're getting kids familiar with what is an exemplar, what is this thing supposed to look like? And you just have increased their confidence because it's not that, it's not an unknown that they're trying to figure out on the day of. Okay. I see we hit our 3:45. I wanted to give some opportunity to answer questions. You'll see I also included in here a sample, but you can go to the New Meridian released samples site, and you can find samples and share them with your students and dissect it and talk about what they like and what they don't. Or you can give them a lower level. You can give them a 2 and say, what is this missing? You can make it fun. We talk about doing it as a gallery walk. Okay. Okay. So I'm just going to wrap up by saying I'm really hopeful that you got a takeaway from today. You will receive the resource, like I said, with those links. But I'd love for you to think about, you can stick it in the Q&A if you like, or just jot down for yourself, what are you going to try? So was there a reading strategy that you liked? Was there a writing strategy that you liked? Jot those down for yourself. And I would say start over the next week or so to introduce those to your students. And again, try the resources that we're sharing. And I really think you'll see success because a lot of it is just in becoming familiar, practicing, and building the skills step by step. So thank you so much for attending. I'm going to also share with you, I realize that the evaluation link is not here. What I'm going to do is share that evaluation link in the follow-up email. And if you wouldn't mind filling it out, that would be super helpful for us. Okay, but again, I'm going to hang out for a couple of moments. And if people have questions that they can stick in the Q&A, I'm happy to do that. Okay. Oh, I got a great question here. So Christy asked, with the revision of the standards, are we aware of changes that will be made to NJSLA for next year? And so the answer is none of that information has been shared yet. I would think that there would be changes. Specifically, I'm thinking about for ELA. One thing that's new is that they removed the companion standards. And so, if you're aware of the companion standards, those were the science and technical texts and the history texts. So, they might remove some of those questions. But to be honest with you, many of those questions also were other ELA standards. So, for example, the text evidence standard or some of the higher standards like nine, which is comparing and relationship building, relationships between components and texts. Um, a lot of the other changes in the standards are around the K5. So that could hit the third, fourth, fifth, but we don't know yet. But I would say stay tuned because these resources, there are some that you can find on our website. We also have workshops. So once anything is updated from the state, we will absolutely update our workshops, our offerings, our resources to reflect anything that's new. Okay. Well, again, if there's any questions, I'm going to hang out for a few more minutes and just keep an eye out for the email with the resources and the evaluation link. I thank you again for joining us today, and I'll just hang out for a couple minutes. Have a great day, everyone. Okay, let's see. Oh, thank you. Thank you to Josephine, Allison, Christy, Kat. Thank you so much. It's great to see some of the names who I know, and then it's also great to see some new people join. So next month, we are going to be doing a similar webinar, but that's going to be for math. So share with your colleagues. Thanks, Kelly. Okay. If nobody else has any other questions, I'm going to get ready to wrap up, and I hope you all have a wonderful evening. Take care.